You never belonged in this family.
Then why did you marry me?
The majority owner has been verified.
Who is it?
I didn't lose because of money, did I?
You lost because you never saw me.
Ryan Whitmore raised his champagne glass with a confident smile as the room applauded his father's retirement. Then he looked directly at his wife and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "You never belonged in this family," he said before everyone. Beside him, Lauren Pierce smiled without shame. Ryan believed Natalie Bennett was just an ordinary woman with nothing to offer. He had no idea why she accepted the divorce papers so calmly, or why one unread call from a lawyer waiting on her phone mattered far more than anyone in the room could imagine. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, Natalie had entered the Whitmore family, believing love mattered more than wealth. When Natalie first met Ryan Whitmore, he had not yet become the polished executive everyone admired. He was ambitious, hardworking, and determined to prove himself inside his father's manufacturing business. Back then, he never asked many questions about her background. She introduced herself simply as Natalie Bennett, a quiet project consultant who preferred a simple life over expensive restaurants and luxury vacations. That was exactly what she wanted him to know. Long before they met, Natalie had made a promise to someone she deeply respected. She would never allow money to become the foundation of another relationship. She had seen too many friendships destroyed and too many marriages built around bank accounts instead of trust. Keeping her private life separate from her public identity had become second nature. Ryan never challenged that decision. Fact that he appreciated it in the beginning. He often joked that Natalie was the only person who loved him before his business cards became impressive. But success changed people in ways neither of them expected. Whitmore Industrial Group had once been one of the strongest family-owned manufacturers in the region. Years of shrinking contracts, rising costs, and poor strategic decisions had quietly pushed the company toward financial disaster. Charles Whitmore refused to discuss those problems publicly. Employees still believed everything was stable. Investors had not yet seen the warning signs. Inside the executive offices, however, everyone understood the pressure. Ryan believed he was the person who could save the company. The closer he moved toward senior leadership, the more convinced he became that he deserved greater recognition. Along the way, he slowly began measuring people by what they could contribute to his ambitions. Natalie no longer fit that picture. She still drove the same modest sedan. She still wore simple clothes. She still avoided social events whenever possible. To Ryan, those choices no longer looked like confidence. They looked like limitations. "You could try a little harder," he told her one evening after another corporate dinner. "Everyone else's spouses know how to present themselves." Natalie looked up from her coffee. "I'm comfortable being myself," Ryan sighed. That's exactly the problem. She never argued. She simply carried the conversation somewhere else. Over time, the distance between them grew quietly instead of dramatically. Small disappointments replaced laughter. Shared dinners became rushed conversations. Ryan spent longer hours at the office, usually explaining that the company demanded everything he had. Eventually, another name appeared more frequently than anyone noticed. Lauren Pierce. She was intelligent, confident, and already respected throughout Whitmore Industrial Group. She challenged Ryan's ideas, praised his leadership, and always seemed available whenever another late-night strategy meeting appeared on his calendar. Natalie met Lauren only a handful of times. Each meeting felt perfectly polite, each sms felt carefully rehearsed. Natalie never accused Ryan of anything. She simply noticed that Lauren somehow knew details about Ryan's schedule before she did. At the same time, Natalie quietly noticed something else. Whenever Ryan complained about company finances, his explanations rarely matched the actual business conditions. He blamed declining sales, he blamed suppliers, he blamed inflation. But the numbers he casually mentioned never quite added up. Natalie asked thoughtful questions once or twice. Ryan laughed. "You wouldn't understand corporate finance." She nodded politely and let the subject disappear. She understood far more than he imagined. Late one evening, while Ryan was still at work, Natalie's phone vibrated across the kitchen counter. Victoria Lawson. The name appeared for only a second before the ringing stopped. Natalie looked at the missed call but did not return it. Instead, she opened her laptop and reviewed several documents that appeared completely unrelated to her daily work. Most people would have found them confusing. Natalie read every page carefully, paying close attention to ownership structures, debt schedules, and acquisition timelines. When she finished, she closed the computer without leaving a single file visible. The following morning, Ryan barely noticed she had been awake half the night. His attention remained fixed on preparing for his father's retirement celebration. "The entire executive team will be there," he said while adjusting his tie. "Tonight matters." Natalie smiled softly. "I know. It would help if you stayed out of the business conversations." She looked at him for a long moment. "I've never interrupted one. I just don't want anyone getting the wrong impression." She quietly reached for her coat. Neither of them spoke again during the drive. By the time they arrived, the ballroom was already filled with executives, longtime clients, board advisors, and members of the Whitmore family. Charles Whitmore stood proudly near the stage, pretending everything inside the company remained under control. Lauren Pierce welcomed guests beside Ryan, as though she already belonged there. Natalie noticed the subtle glance they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. She felt the sting, but she stood tall. No scene, no accusation, no loss of dignity. As the evening continued, Ryan introduced nearly everyone in the room, everyone except his wife. Natalie quietly stepped toward a window overlooking the aging factory buildings across the street. Her phone vibrated once more. Victoria Lawson. This time, Natalie answered. "I'll meet you tomorrow," she said calmly before ending the call. Natalie ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse as if nothing had happened. Behind her, the soft hum of conversation returned. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. The retirement dinner resumed its polished rhythm, but something had already shifted for her. She no longer stood there as Ryan's overlooked wife. She stood there as someone who had made a decision. She just hadn't told anyone yet. Across the room, Ryan was speaking with two senior executives, his posture confident, his tone controlled. Lauren stood close beside him, her hand brushing his arm in a way that seemed natural only to them. Natalie watched for a moment, not with jealousy, but with clarity. The distance between them was no longer confusing. It was obvious. Ryan caught sight of her eventually. His expression tightened slightly, as if remembering something inconvenient. "You're still here?" he asked when she approached. Natalie met his eyes calmly. "It's still your father's dinner." Ryan let out a short breath, almost amused. "You didn't have to stay after all that. The words hung between them, the public dismissal. The envelope still tucked inside her bag, the quiet humiliation he had delivered like a business decision. "I didn't want to make a scene," Natalie said. Ryan nodded, but his attention had already drifted back to Lauren, who leaned in slightly and whispered something that made him smile again. Natalie noticed the shift, the way his shoulders relaxed around Lauren, the way his voice softened. She had not heard that tone directed at her in a long time. "You should probably head home soon," Ryan added, almost as an afterthought. "It's going to be a late night. We have investors to talk to." Investors. Natalie's gaze flickered briefly toward the far end of the room, where Charles Whitmore stood speaking in low, urgent tones with a man she didn't recognize. The conversation looked tense, controlled but strained. She had seen that kind of conversation before. Deals that were already failing before they were spoken out loud. "I hope it goes well," she said. Ryan gave a dismissive shrug. "It will, as long as people who don't understand business stop interfering." The meaning was clear. Natalie didn't respond. She simply nodded once and turned away. She moved toward the exit quietly, unnoticed by most of the room. No one stopped her. No one asked if she was okay. To them, she was exactly what Ryan believed her to be. A quiet presence that no longer mattered. Outside, the air was colder than she expected. She paused at the steps, taking a slow breath. The night stretched out in front of her, still and empty. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. Not anger, not even sadness, just the weight of realization. 3 years of marriage had ended in a single public moment, and somehow it felt like something had already been over long before tonight. Her phone vibrated again. Victoria Lawson. This time, Natalie answered immediately. "I'm outside," she said. "I assumed you would be," Victoria replied, her voice steady, precise. "Did he go through with it?" "Yes." A brief pause followed. "Publicly?" Natalie glanced back at the building behind her, its lights glowing warm against the dark. "Yes." Another pause, shorter this time. "Then we proceed as planned," Victoria said. "There's no benefit in delaying now." Natalie tightened her grip on her purse slightly. "What's the timeline?" "The acquisition window is still open, but not for long. The board is moving faster than expected. If we don't finalize before their emergency vote, control could shift in ways that complicate things." Natalie absorbed that. Inside the building, Ryan was still talking about investors, still believing he was choosing the future of the company. "You're certain everything is ready?" she asked. "All documents are prepared," Victoria said. "Ownership will be transferred through the holding structure exactly as discussed. Your identity remains protected unless you choose otherwise." Natalie looked down at the microphone for a moment. "Not yet," she said quietly. "I understand," Victoria replied. "But you should know something." Natalie waited. "Whitmore Industrial Group is in worse condition than their internal reports suggest," Victoria continued. "There are liabilities they haven't disclosed publicly. If we proceed, you're not just acquiring a struggling company. You're inheriting a situation that will require immediate restructuring." Natalie exhaled slowly. "I expected that." There was no hesitation in her voice, only certainty. "Then I'll schedule the meeting," Victoria said. "Tomorrow morning, private location. You'll review everything before signing." Natalie nodded, even though Victoria couldn't see her. "I'll be there." The call ended. For a moment, Natalie stood alone in the quiet night, the sounds of the dinner fading behind her. Then she walked down the steps and toward her car. Inside, she placed her purse on the passenger seat and sat still, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she let herself think. Not about Ryan, not about Lauren, not even about the humiliation. She thought about the company, about the employees who had no idea how close they were to losing everything, about the decisions being made in rooms where pride mattered more than survival, and about the fact that Ryan had just handed her a reason to stop holding back. Her phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't Victoria. It was a message, unknown number. Natalie hesitated for only a second before opening it. A photo loaded slowly on the screen. Ryan. Close. Too close to be explained as anything professional. Natalie stared at the image without reacting at first. Then she zoomed in slightly. The angle was discreet, taken from across the room or behind a glass surface. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. Another message followed. "You deserve to know." Natalie's thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't reply. She didn't delete it either. Instead, she locked the phone and placed it face down beside her. The confirmation didn't break her. It clarified something she had already felt. She started the engine. The car hummed softly to life as she pulled away from the curb. Behind her, the Whitmore family continued their celebration, unaware that the woman they had just dismissed was already stepping into a position that would decide their future. Natalie drove in silence, her mind steady, her emotions contained. She wasn't running, or she wasn't hiding, she was choosing, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't choosing to stay. When she reached home, the house felt different, not emptier, just clearer. She walked inside, set her keys down, and moved directly to the small desk in the corner of the living room. Her laptop sat exactly where she had left it. She opened it. The screen lit up with a secure login interface. Natalie entered her credentials without hesitation. Within seconds, a series of documents appeared, financial breakdowns, ownership structures, acquisition timelines, all organized with precision. At the top of the file list was one label, Asset 44B. Natalie stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she reached for her phone and sent a single message. "I'm confirming tomorrow. Proceed with legal prep." Victoria responded almost immediately. "Understood. You'll receive final authorization documents at the meeting." Natalie closed the laptop slowly. Then she leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, her breathing steady. Across town, Ryan stood at the center of a room full of people, believing he had just removed a problem from his life. He had no idea he had just created a much bigger one. And as Natalie turned off the lights and prepared for the morning ahead, her phone buzzed one last time. A calendar notification. Emergency board meeting confirmed. Charles Whitmore slammed the financial report onto his desk so hard the papers slid across the polished surface and scattered onto the floor. "This is not a temporary downturn," he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We are out of time." Ryan stood across from him, arms crossed, jaw set. He had heard this tone before, but never this sharp, never this final. "It's not that bad," Ryan insisted. "We just need another round of funding. Maybe restructure a few contracts." Charles cut him off with a raised hand. "The banks have already reviewed our projections. They're not extending anything. Our suppliers are tightening credit. If we miss one more payment cycle, we default." The words hung in the air. Default. Ryan exhaled slowly, but the confidence he carried at the dinner the night before felt thinner now. He moved toward the desk, scanning the reports. "There has to be another option," he said. "We don't just give up the company." Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression exhausted. "It's not about giving up, it's about survival." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about selling. I'm talking about a controlled acquisition," Charles corrected. "A buyer who takes over the majority stake before the company collapses completely." Ryan shook his head immediately. "No, that's not happening." Charles said nothing for a moment. Then he reached into a folder and pulled out a document. "They've already made an offer." Ryan froze. "They?" Charles slid the paper across the desk. "Anonymous holding group. They've been circling us for months." Ryan picked up the document, scanning it quickly. The structure was clean, professional, no unnecessary detail, just terms, timelines, and numbers. High numbers. "Who are they?" Ryan asked. "We don't know," Charles said. "They operate through layers of legal representation. Everything goes through one firm." Ryan looked up. "Which firm?" Charles hesitated for half a second. "Lawson and Pierce." Ryan's grip on the paper tightened slightly. He recognized the name. "Victoria Lawson?" he asked. Charles nodded. "She's been representing them from the beginning." Ryan let out a short breath. "So this is what? Some private equity group trying to strip us for parts?" Charles shook his head slowly. "No. That's the strange part." He tapped the document. "They're not negotiating like predators. They're offering to absorb the debt, maintain operations, keep most of the workforce, and stabilize the supply chain." Ryan frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't," Charles agreed. "Unless the buyer has a reason to preserve the company." Ryan leaned back, thinking. "Or they're hiding something." "Everyone hides something in a deal like this," Charles said quietly. "The question is whether we can afford to care." Ryan didn't answer. He stared at the numbers again, trying to find the angle, the weakness, the leverage. But the structure was airtight. Clean, controlled, intentional. Whoever was behind this wasn't guessing. They knew exactly what they were doing. Across town, Natalie sat at a long glass table in a quiet conference room, reviewing the same acquisition file. The difference was, she wasn't seeing it for the first time. Victoria Lawson stood beside her, flipping through a printed version of the documents. "The board has scheduled an emergency vote," Victoria said. "If they reject the acquisition again, their options narrow significantly. At that point, bankruptcy becomes a real possibility." Natalie nodded slightly, her eyes scanning the projections. "They won't reject it again," she said. Victoria looked at her. "What makes you certain?" Natalie closed the folder. "Because they don't have anything else left." Her tone was calm, not confident, certain. Victoria studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "You've reviewed everything?" "Yes." "And you understand the liabilities?" Natalie met her gaze. "I do." Victoria placed a second folder on the table. "Then we proceed to final authorization. Once you sign, the acquisition becomes binding. Ownership transfers through the holding structure. From that point forward, you control the majority stake." Natalie didn't reach for the pen immediately. Instead, she glanced at the document again. Whitmore Industrial Group. The name sat there in clean print, stripped of emotion. Just another asset in a long list of acquisitions. Except it wasn't just another company. It was Ryan's company, his family's legacy, the place where he had decided she didn't belong. Victoria watched her carefully. "If you have any reservations, this is the moment to raise them." Natalie shook her head. "No reservations." She picked up the pen. But before signing, she paused, not because she doubted the decision, because she understood the weight of it. Once this was done, there would be no going back to the version of her life Ryan believed in, no more pretending, no more shrinking herself to fit someone else's expectations. She signed, clean, steady, final. Victoria exhaled quietly. It's done, she said. We'll initiate the transfer immediately. The board will be notified after the legal confirmation is complete. Natalie set the pen down. When is the meeting? Tomorrow morning, Victoria replied. They'll expect to meet a representative of the holding group. Natalie looked up. I'll attend. Victoria raised an eyebrow slightly. In person, yes. The Victoria nodded once. Then we'll prepare for verification procedures. They'll challenge everything, identity, authority, ownership chain. We'll need to walk them through it step by step. Natalie Shears stood. As she gathered her things, her phone buzzed softly in her hand. Another message. Unknown number. She already knew what it would be. Another photo, another angle. Ryan and Lauren closer this time. More obvious. Natalie didn't open it fully. She didn't need to. She locked the phone and slipped it into her bag. Victoria noticed the movement but didn't comment. Is there anything else? Natalie asked. One thing, Victoria said. Natalie waited. The board isn't the only risk, Victoria continued. If internal misconduct surfaces during the transition, it could complicate the restructuring process. We'll need to assess whether any executive actions violated company policy or fiduciary duty. Natalie's expression didn't change. I've already started reviewing that, she said. Victoria gave a small, approving nod. Then we'll be ready. Natalie left the building alone. No driver, no escort, just her walking into the late afternoon light like any other person finishing a quiet meeting. No one on the street looked twice, no one recognized the decision she had just made. Back at Whitmore headquarters, Ryan paced inside the conference room, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care who they are, he said sharply. We can negotiate better terms. He listened, his expression tightening. No, we don't accept their timeline. We push the vote. Buy ourselves another week. He paused again. Then his voice dropped. What do you mean they won't delay? Across the table, Charles watched him carefully. Ryan lowered the phone slowly. They're forcing the meeting, he said. When? Charles asked. Tomorrow morning. The room went quiet. Charles exhaled. Then we prepare. Ryan nodded, but something about the situation unsettled him. Everything felt too controlled, too precise. Like the outcome had already been decided somewhere he couldn't see. That night, as Ryan sat alone in his office, reviewing the acquisition terms again, something caught his attention. A signature line. Not visible at first glance. Buried under layers of corporate structure. He leaned closer. The name wasn't fully shown, just initials. N.S. Ryan frowned. He stared at the letters for a long moment, trying to place them. It meant nothing. It shouldn't have meant anything. And yet something about it felt familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He shook it off and closed the file. Across the city, Natalie stood by her window, looking out at the quiet skyline. Her fleck in the glass looked the same as always. Simple, unremarkable, invisible. But that version of her was already disappearing. Her phone buzzed once more. Victoria, all confirmations are complete, the message read. The board has officially accepted the meeting. Natalie typed a single response. I'll be there. She set the phone down and turned off the light. Tomorrow they would all be in the same room. And for the first time, Ryan would be forced to listen to someone he had already decided was insignificant. He just didn't know who that someone really was. The apartment Natalie moved into was quiet in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Not empty, not lonely, just undisturbed. No raised voices, no dismissive sighs, no subtle tension hanging in the air like something waiting to snap. She placed her bag on the small kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around her. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something close to control. Her phone buzzed. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Ryan? Again. The screen lit up with his name, followed by a short message. Where are you? We need to talk. Natalie stared at it for a few seconds, then turned the screen off without replying. He had wanted distance, now he had it. Across the city, Ryan stood in his office, jaw tight, staring at the unanswered messages on his phone. She's ignoring you, Lauren said casually from the chair across from him, crossing her legs. Ryan exhaled sharply. She doesn't get to ignore me, not after yesterday. Lauren tilted her head, studying him. You already gave her what she deserved, she said. Why does it matter where she went? Ryan didn't answer immediately. Because it did matter. Not emotionally. He told himself that clearly. It mattered because of timing. The acquisition. The board meeting. The pressure. Everything was happening at once, and Natalie disappearing without a word felt inconvenient, unpredictable. Lauren leaned forward slightly. "You're thinking about the optics," she said. Ryan glanced at her. "You serve divorce papers publicly," she continued. "People will talk. If she shows up again and causes a scene, she won't?" Ryan, he sounded certain, but there was something underneath it, a flicker of doubt he didn't want to examine. Lauren smiled faintly. "Good. Because the last thing we need right now is unnecessary drama." Ryan nodded, more to himself than to her. "Focus on the meeting tomorrow," she added. "That's what matters." He picked up the acquisition file again, flipping through it. Numbers. Terms, conditions. Still clean, still controlled, still impossible to read beyond the surface. "They're too confident," Ryan muttered. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Or they know something we don't." Ryan didn't like that answer. Back in her apartment, Natalie sat at a small table with her laptop open, reviewing documents Victoria had sent over. Legal summaries, internal audit notes, communication logs. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't reacting emotionally. She was organizing, separating facts from assumptions, or patterns from noise. Her eyes paused on a set of expense reports tied to executive accounts. Ryan's name appeared more than once, so did Lauren's. She clicked into the details: dinner charges, hotel bookings, travel reimbursements that didn't align with official schedules. Nothing illegal on its own, but together they painted a clearer picture. Natalie leaned back slightly, her expression, and she wasn't unchanged. She wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Victoria, I've sent you preliminary findings," Victoria said. "Nothing actionable yet, but enough to raise internal concerns if needed." "I saw them," Natalie replied. A pause. Then Victoria spoke again, more carefully. "There's also another issue." Natalie waited. "Some confidential projections appear to have been shared outside approved channels," Victoria said. "We're still tracing the source." Natalie's gaze returned to the expense reports. She didn't need to guess. "Document everything," she said calmly. "We are, and keep it separate from the acquisition file for now." Victoria understood immediately. "You don't want it influencing the board's decision?" "No," Natalie said. "I want the decision to stand on its own." Another pause. "You're handling this very deliberately," Victoria noted. Natalie closed one file and opened another. "I'm not here to punish anyone," she said. "I'm here to make sure the company survives." Victoria didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "That's exactly what your mother used to say." Natalie said nothing. After the call ended, she sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the table. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope Ryan had given her. The divorce papers, she hadn't opened them yet. Not because she was afraid, because she wanted to read them when she was ready to process them as a decision, not as an emotional reaction now. She was ready. She opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the documents inside. Clean formatting, standard language, grounds listed, irreconcilable differences. Her eyes moved steadily across the page. There was no anger in the wording, no cruelty, just absence. Like their marriage had already been reduced to something administrative. She reached the section outlining asset division. Simple, because there was almost nothing in her name. At least, nothing Ryan knew about. Natalie let out a quiet breath. Then she picked up a pen and made a small mark on the margin of one page, not signing, just boundary. She wasn't agreeing to anything yet. Across town, Charles sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. The building was quiet. Too quiet. He looked at the same acquisition proposal again, reading it more slowly this time. Not as a desperate man searching for salvation, but as someone trying to understand the person behind it. They weren't squeezing him. They weren't exploiting the company's weakness. They were preserving it. That didn't make sense. Unless his phone rang, breaking the thought. He picked it up immediately. "Yes?" A voice on the other end spoke briefly. Charles's expression shifted. "You're sure?" he asked. Another pause. Then he leaned back in his chair, his grip tightening slightly on the phone. "Understood," he said quietly. He hung up slowly, then stared at the document in front of him again. Something had just changed. In the morning, the boardroom filled faster than usual. Executives, legal advisors, directors. Tension sat in every chair. Ryan stood near the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks, his posture confident but slightly rigid. Lauren sat close enough to him to be noticed. Far enough to still be technically appropriate. Charles entered last, his face unreadable. We proceed as scheduled, he said. No delays. Ryan nodded. Good, he said. Let's get this over with. A few minutes later, the door opened, not dramatically. Just a quiet click. Victoria Lawson stepped in first, composed professional carrying a slim folder. Conversations in the room stopped almost immediately. Ryan straightened slightly. So that's the representative, he murmured under his breath. Victoria moved toward the table without hesitation. Good morning, she said. I represent the acquiring party. Charles gestured towards a seat. Thank you for coming, Ms. Lawson. We're ready to review final terms. Victoria didn't sit. Before we begin, she said, there is a procedural matter we need to address. Ryan frowned slightly. What kind of matter? Victoria's gaze moved briefly across the room, then toward the door. We will need to confirm the identity of the controlling party, she said. A few board members exchanged looks. That's standard, one of the legal advisors said. We can proceed with documentation. No. Victoria interrupted calmly. The controlling party will be... The room shifted. Ryan let out a short laugh. They're showing up in person? He said. That's unexpected. Charles didn't react. He was watching the door, so was Victoria. The handle turned, and as it slowly opened, Ryan leaned back slightly in his chair, already forming a dismissive assumption about whoever was about to walk in. He had no idea how wrong he was. The door opened slowly, almost quietly, but the shift it caused inside the room was immediate. Natalie Bennett stepped in. For a second, no one reacted. The recognition came in pieces, not all at once. Ryan blinked, confused, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. You've got to be kidding me, he said under his breath. Lauren's posture stiffened beside him. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning Natalie from head to toe, as if trying to understand what role she thought she was playing. Charles didn't speak at all. He just stared. Natalie didn't rush. She walked in with the same calm she had carried out of the dinner days earlier. No hesitation. No apology, no visible emotion. Different from the woman they thought they knew. Victoria Lawson stepped aside just enough to allow Natalie to move forward. She shouldn't be here, Ryan said louder now, his voice carrying across the table. This is a closed meeting. Natalie didn't answer him. She placed a slim folder on the table, directly in front of an empty chair, then took that seat without asking permission. That alone disrupted the room. A director leaned toward legal counsel, whispering something urgent. Ryan let out another laugh, sharper this time. Seriously, Natalie, he said, you show up now? What, you want to argue about the divorce in front of everyone? Still no response. Instead, Natalie turned her attention to Victoria. I believe we're ready to proceed, she said calmly. The room went still again. Ryan's smile faded just a little. Victoria nodded. We are. One of the company attorneys cleared his throat, stepping in. For the record, he said carefully, before we continue, we need formal identification of the controlling party behind the acquisition. That is standard protocol. Of course, Victoria replied. Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly amused now. Great, he said. Let's meet the mystery investor. A few people chuckled quietly. Lauren didn't. She was watching Natalie too closely. Victoria reached into her folder and placed several documents on the table. Initial verification materials, she said, chain of ownership, holding structure, and representation authority. The attorney picked them up immediately, scanning through. His expression didn't change at first. Then it did. Slightly, he flipped to the next page. Then another. Ryan noticed, he asked, impatience creeping in. What is it? The attorney didn't answer right away. He passed one of the documents to the corporate secretary. Please confirm signatures, he said. The secretary adjusted her glasses, reviewing the page carefully. Silence stretched. Ryan's fingers tapped against the table. Can someone explain what's going on? He demanded. Natalie finally looked at him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. You'll understand in a moment, she said. That irritated him more than anything else. Don't talk like that, Ryan snapped. You don't even belong in this room. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Charles still hadn't spoken. The corporate secretary looked up. The signatures are valid, she said. They match the registry. Another attorney leaned in, reviewing the ownership chain. This holding company, it's layered, he muttered. Multiple entities, offshore structures, all properly filed, Ryan frowned. Yeah, that's what big investors do, he said dismissively. So what? The attorney turned another page, then stopped. This name, he said quietly. Victoria didn't react. Continue, she said. The attorney looked up slowly. The controlling entity is linked to a trust, he said. Primary beneficiary, he hesitated. Ryan leaned forward. Who? He pushed. The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed the document across the table. To you, he said. Ryan grabbed it, scanning quickly. At first, nothing made sense. Structured terms. Then he saw it, a name. Not the one he expected, not a corporation, not a fund, a person. He frowned harder, reading it again. That's not, he started. His voice trailed off. Lauren leaned closer, trying to read over his shoulder. What does it say? She whispered. Ryan didn't respond. Because the name didn't fit the narrative in his head. It didn't match anything he believed. This has to be wrong, he said, louder now. There's no way it isn't wrong, Victoria said calmly. The room shifted again. Ryan looked up, frustration turning sharper. Then explain it, he said. Victoria glanced briefly toward Natalie, then back to the table. The acquisition was executed through a private holding structure, she said. All documentation has been verified by independent counsel. That doesn't answer the question, Ryan snapped. It does, Victoria replied. You're just not accepting it. Charles finally spoke. Ryan, he said quietly, let them finish. Ryan clenched his jaw. He didn't like being corrected, especially not now. Victoria stepped forward slightly. For full compliance, she continued, we will proceed with identity confirmation in person. She turned her body toward Natalie. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Several people in the room followed her gaze. Ryan didn't, not yet. He was still staring at the document in his hand, trying to force it to make sense. This name, he said slowly. It doesn't connect to anything, it does, Victoria said. Ryan looked up. For the final time, she added, please direct your attention to the controlling party. Ryan followed her gaze. Finally, he looked at Natalie. Really looked, not as his wife, not as the woman he had dismissed, but as the person sitting calmly at the center of the room while everyone else waited. His expression didn't change immediately. Confusion came first, then disbelief, then something deeper. No, he said quietly. Lauren's eyes widened slightly. What? She whispered. Ryan shook his head, almost laughing again, but there was no humor left in it. No, that's not possible. Natalie didn't move, didn't defend herself, didn't confirm anything yet. The attorney cleared his throat again. We still require formal identification, he said. Documentation alone is not sufficient. Victoria nodded. Of course. She reached for another document, but before she placed it down, she paused. Just long enough to let the weight of the moment settle. Then she looked at Natalie. Are you ready? She asked. The room held its breath. Ryan stared at Natalie, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to say this was a misunderstanding, waiting for reality to return to something familiar. But Natalie didn't look away. She met his eyes, and for the first time since he had known her, there was no softness left to misunderstand, only certainty. She placed her hand gently on the table and said quietly, let's proceed. Silence didn't just fill the room, it settled into it, heavy and immovable. Ryan stared at Natalie as if the air between them had suddenly changed shape. No, he said again, louder this time. This doesn't make any sense. Natalie didn't respond. She didn't need to. The attorneys were already moving. One of them stood, pulling the document closer, adjusting his glasses as he examined the signature block again. Another attorney opened a laptop, pulling up corporate registry records in real time. This needs full verification, he said firmly. We cannot proceed on assumption. Victoria nodded. That is expected. She stepped slightly to the side, giving the legal team full access to the documents. No hesitation, no resistance. That confidence unsettled the room more than anything else. Ryan pushed back his chair, standing halfway. This is ridiculous, he said. You're telling me he pointed at Natalie. She's the one behind all this. No one has stated that yet. One of the attorneys replied carefully. We are confirming identity. Ryan let out a short, sharp laugh. Yeah, well, confirm faster. Lauren shifted beside him, her posture no longer relaxed. Her earlier confidence had faded into something tighter, more cautious. She wasn't looking at Natalie with amusement anymore. She was watching her like a problem. Charles leaned forward slowly, his hands clasped together. Ms. Lawson, he said, voice controlled but strained. If this is some kind of procedural misunderstanding, I suggest we resolve it quickly. Victoria met his gaze. It isn't a misunderstanding, she said. The corporate secretary cleared her throat. I've confirmed the signature alignment across the filings, she said. They match the registry and prior submissions tied to the holding structure. Another attorney spoke up. The trust listed here, it's not new, he said. It's been active for years. Quiet but established. Ryan frowned. So what? He snapped. A lot of trusts exist, that doesn't mean anything. It means the entity behind this acquisition isn't recent, the attorney replied. It's been structured deliberately over time. Ryan shook his head. You're overcomplicating it, he said. We're here to finalize a deal, not dissect paperwork for hours. Natalie watched him without interrupting. He still spoke like he had control, like the room still moved around him. Victoria reached into her folder again. For final verification, she said, we will present identification documents tied to the controlling beneficiary. The words landed differently this time. No one spoke. Even Ryan didn't interrupt. She placed a sealed envelope on the table. This contains certified identity records, she continued, reviewed by independent counsel and notarized under applicable jurisdiction. One of the attorneys stepped forward, taking the envelope carefully. Chain of custody, he asked. Victoria slid another document across the table. Documented, she said. He reviewed it quickly, then nodded. The envelope was opened. Inside, multiple pages, identification records, legal certifications, trust documentation. The attorney flipped through them slowly. His expression didn't shift immediately. Then it did, a subtle tightening around his eyes. He looked up, then back down. Then across the table toward Natalie. Ryan saw it. What? He demanded again. Just say it, the attorney hesitated. We need to complete cross-verification, he said. This isn't something we announce prematurely. Ryan slammed his hand lightly against the table. This whole thing is premature, he snapped. She's not, Ryan, Charles said sharply. It was the first time his voice carried authority since the meeting began. Ryan stopped, not because he agreed, because the tone forced him to. Charles looked at the attorney. Finish the verification, he said. Minutes passed, not long, but long enough for tension to stretch tight across every seat. The legal team worked quietly, checking registry databases, comparing identification markers, confirming trust linkages. Lauren shifted again, her hand slowly withdrawing from the table. She leaned closer to Ryan, her voice low. Something's off, she whispered. Ryan didn't answer. He was staring at Natalie now, trying to find something familiar, something that made sense. But there was nothing to hold on to. No hesitation, no fear, or no attempt to defend herself. Just calm. It unsettled him more than anger would have. Finally, one of the attorneys closed his laptop. He exhaled once, then looked at the others. It's consistent, he said quietly. Another attorney nodded. Fully consistent, he confirmed. The corporate secretary straightened in her seat. For the record, she said, the documentation aligns with the controlling trust and holding structure presented in the acquisition filings. Ryan's jaw tightened. Speak English, he said. What does that actually mean? The attorney turned toward him. It means the identity presented in these documents matches the controlling beneficiary of the acquiring entity, he said. Ryan shook his head again. No, he said. That's not possible. He looked directly at Natalie. Say something, he demanded. Tell them this is wrong. Natalie didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She didn't soften the moment. I'm not here to argue, she said quietly. I'm here to complete the process. That answer hit harder than denial would have. Lauren leaned back slightly, her face pale now. Ryan, she whispered. He ignored her. This is insane, he said. You don't even understand how this company works. Natalie's gaze didn't waver. I understand it better than you think, she replied. A director at the far end of the table cleared his throat. If the verification stands, he said cautiously, then we are obligated to recognize the controlling party's authority. Another director nodded slowly. That includes voting power, he added. The words landed like weight dropping onto the table. Ryan's expression shifted. Not disbelief anymore. Something closer to panic. No, he said again. No, that's not happening. Victoria stepped forward. There is one final document, she said. Every head turned toward her. She placed a single sheet on the table. Authorization for representation, she said. Effective immediately upon verification. The attorney picked it up, scanning quickly. His eyes moved to the signature line, then to Natalie, then back to the document. Ryan watched the exchange, his chest tightening. What now? He asked. The attorney didn't answer him. Instead, he addressed the room. Pending final confirmation of identity, he said, this document would grant full authority to act on behalf of the controlling entity in this meeting. The implication was clear. Whoever that controlling party was, they were about to take control of the room. Ryan's gaze snapped back to Natalie. For the first time, doubt fully broke through his certainty. Not because he believed it, but because he couldn't disprove it anymore. Natalie reached forward slowly. Her hand rested near the document, not touching it yet, just close enough. The entire room watched that small movement like it carried more weight than anything said so far. Victoria looked at her. "We're ready," she said. Natalie didn't move immediately. She let the silence stretch 1 second longer. Then she lifted her eyes and met Ryan's, not as his wife, not as someone beneath him, but as someone standing exactly where she had always belonged. "Proceed with the final confirmation," she said. And this time no one in the room laughed. The attorney didn't rush. That was the part that made it worse. He read every page again, slower this time, as if giving the room one last chance to prove itself wrong. The quiet hum of the air conditioning became loud enough to notice. Papers shifted. Someone cleared their throat. No one spoke. Finally, he placed the documents flat on the table and looked directly at Natalie. "Please confirm your legal identity for the record," he said. Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're entertaining this?" Natalie didn't look at him. She reached into her bag, calm and deliberate, and pulled out a single card. Not flashy, not dramatic, just official. She slid it across the table. The attorney picked it up. His eyes moved over the name, then stopped. The shift in his expression was no longer subtle. It was clear. He passed the card to the corporate secretary. "Verify," he said quietly. The secretary compared the identification to the documents already spread across the table. Her fingers moved carefully, double-checking every detail. Then she looked up. "For the record," she said, her voice steady but tighter now, "the identification matches the controlling beneficiary listed in the trust." The room didn't react all at once. It fractured. A chair creaked. Someone whispered under their breath. Lauren's hand slipped fully off the table. Stood up. "No," he said immediately. "No, that's not right." He pointed at Natalie, his voice rising. "She's Natalie Bennett, my wife." "She doesn't have," the attorney interrupted him. "Legally," he said, "her identity is listed as Natalie Sterling." The name hit the room like a dropped weight. Ryan froze. "What?" he said, quieter now. The attorney continued. "Primary beneficiary of the Sterling Family Trust," he said. "Controlling interest verified through layered holding entities tied directly to the acquisition." Charles inhaled sharply. He had heard the name before, not often, but enough to understand what it meant. Ryan didn't. "Stop throwing around names," he snapped. "What does that actually mean?" The attorney met his eyes. "It means," he said carefully, "the acquisition of Whitmore Industrial Group was executed by an entity ultimately controlled by her." He gestured toward Natalie. "Your wife." Silence collapsed into something heavier. Ryan stared at her, not angry now, not dismissive. Just trying to understand something that refused to fit. "That's not possible," he said again, but it sounded weaker this time. Natalie finally spoke. "I didn't plan for it to be personal," she said. Her voice was calm, even. "I approved the acquisition based on financial review," she continued. "The structure was designed to remain anonymous. I wasn't aware it was your company until after the process had already begun. That only made it worse. Because it meant this wasn't revenge. It wasn't strategy against him. It was something bigger." Lauren let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So this whole time," she said softly, no one answered her. Ryan shook his head again, stepping back slightly as if distance might help. "You're lying," he said, but he didn't sound convinced anymore. Natalie didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself with emotion. Instead, she reached for the final document Victoria had placed earlier, the authorization. Her signature was already there. Neat, precise, undeniable. She slid it forward. The attorney reviewed it quickly, then nodded. "Authority confirmed," he said. The corporate secretary spoke next. "Effective immediately, the controlling entity holds majority ownership," she said. "Voting rights transfer accordingly." A director at the far end of the table leaned forward. "That includes executive authority," he added. Ryan's head snapped toward him. "What?" he said. "It means," the director clarified, "leadership decisions now fall under the authority of the new majority owner." Ryan looked back at Natalie. His voice cracked just slightly. "You don't even work here," he said. "You don't know how this company runs." Natalie held his gaze. "I know enough to understand what's been happening inside it," she said. That landed harder than anything else. Lauren shifted in her seat, suddenly very aware of the distance between her and Ryan. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Natalie didn't look at her. Instead, she opened another folder. Inside were documents. Printed, organized, marked. She didn't slide them across yet, she just let them sit there. "Before we proceed with restructuring," Natalie said calmly, "there are internal matters that need to be addressed." Ryan's chest tightened. "What internal matters?" he demanded. Natalie finally moved the folder forward. The attorney closest to her picked it up. He flipped it open and stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly as he read. Then he turned the page and another. Lauren leaned forward instinctively. "What is it?" she asked. The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at Ryan. "You may want to sit down," he said. Ryan didn't move. "What is it?" he repeated. The attorney exhaled once. "These appear to be internal expense reports and communication records," he said, "linked to executive accounts." Ryan's jaw tightened. He pushed. The attorney hesitated, then turned the folder slightly so others could see. "Several entries suggest potential misuse of company funds," he said carefully. "Non-business expenses categorized under operational budgets." The room shifted again. Different this time, heavier. Lauren's face drained of color. "That's not," she started. The attorney raised a hand slightly. "I'm not making accusations," he said. "I'm stating what the documents suggest." Ryan stepped forward. "Give me that," he said, reaching for the folder. The attorney didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, he looked at Natalie. She gave a small nod. Only then did he pass it. Ryan flipped through the pages quickly, too quickly, then, slower, his breathing changed, because he recognized the entries, the dates, the places, the names. Lauren stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're taking things out of context, not with anger, but with something colder. These are internal records," she said. "Context is documented," Lauren faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Ryan looked up from the folder, his expression no longer controlled. "You went through my accounts?" he said. Natalie shook her head slightly. "The company did," she replied. That distinction mattered a lot. The room understood it immediately. Ryan's authority wasn't just challenged. It was gone. He looked around the table at the directors, at his father, at the attorneys. No one was on his side anymore. Not because they had turned against him, because the structure had shifted, and he hadn't seen it coming. Natalie closed the folder gently. "This isn't about punishment," she said. Her voice remained calm. "It's about accountability." The words settled into the room with quiet finality. Ryan stared at her. "You're doing this because of the divorce," he said. Natalie shook her head. "No," she said. "I'm doing this because it's necessary." That was worse, because it meant he didn't matter in this decision. "Not anymore." Victoria stepped forward slightly. "There is one final matter to address," she said. Everyone turned toward her. She placed another document on the table, this one thinner, but heavier in implication. Given the findings presented, she continued, the controlling entity reserves the right to initiate immediate leadership review. Ryan's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" he asked, even though part of him already knew. Victoria didn't answer him. She looked at Natalie. The decision wasn't hers to announce. It never had been. The room held its breath again, waiting. Natalie looked down at the document, then back up. Her eyes moved across the table, taking in every face, every reaction, every silence that had once worked against her. Now working for her, she rested her hand lightly on the paper and said, "Let's begin the review." Ryan's stomach dropped, because this time he understood exactly what that meant. The room did not explode into chaos. It tightened, like everything had been pulled inward, compressed into a single point where no one could breathe properly anymore. Ryan didn't sit. He stayed standing, as if refusing to accept what sitting would mean. Across from him, Natalie remained still, her hand resting lightly on the table, not claiming space, not demanding control, just present. And that presence was enough to shift everything. Victoria Lawson stepped forward, her tone measured, professional. "For the record," she said, "this review is not a conclusion. It is a formal process." That mattered, because it meant what came next wouldn't be emotional. It would be documented. Ryan let out a sharp laugh. "You're really doing this," he said, looking at Natalie. "You're going to dismantle everything because you're angry." Natalie met his eyes. "I'm going to follow the same rules this company has always claimed to follow," she said quietly. That hit harder than any accusation, because it wasn't personal, it was procedural. and that made it impossible to dismiss. Charles finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "Natalie," he said carefully, this can be handled privately. He wasn't protecting Ryan. He was protecting the company, the name, the illusion that everything was still under control. Natalie turned toward him, her expression unchanged. "It already was private," she said, "until it stopped being contained." She glanced briefly at the folder still in Ryan's hand. That was enough. Charles understood. This wasn't something that could be quietly buried anymore. One of the independent directors leaned forward. "We need clarity," he said. "What exactly are we reviewing?" Victoria nodded slightly. "Executive conduct tied to financial oversight and fiduciary responsibility," she replied. "Specifically any actions that may have compromised company assets or violated internal policy." Ryan scoffed. "Policy?" he said. "You're acting like I've been stealing." No one answered him. That silence was louder than anything else. Lauren stepped in quickly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We're talking about expenses that were approved. Travel, client meetings." The attorney who had reviewed the documents earlier shook his head slightly. "Some of these expenses are tied to locations and timelines that don't align with recorded business activities," he said. Lauren's voice tightened. "You're misinterpreting. I'm reading the records," he interrupted. That was the difference. Interpretation could be argued. Records couldn't. Ryan finally dropped into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. But even he didn't sound like he believed it anymore. Because he had seen the pages, he knew what was in them. Natalie didn't press further. She didn't need to. The weight of the evidence was already doing the work. Instead, she shifted slightly, creating space for the process to move forward. That alone showed something no one in the room had expected. Control. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just steady. Victoria continued. "As majority owner," she said, "Miss Sterling has the authority to request a full internal audit and temporary reassignment of executive responsibilities during review." Ryan looked up sharply. "Temporary," he repeated. Victoria didn't soften it. "Pending outcome," she said. That was worse than immediate removal, because it meant uncertainty. It meant waiting. It meant every decision, every action would now be questioned. Ryan's jaw tightened. "You're suspending me," he said. The director who had spoken earlier shook his head. "Not suspending," he clarified. "Reviewing. There's a difference." Ryan laughed again, but there was no humor left in it. "Right," he said. "Of course there is." Lauren stepped closer to him now, her voice lower. "This is just pressure," she said. "They're trying to force control." "You don't have to accept this." Ryan didn't answer her, because for the first time he wasn't sure what he could accept anymore. Across the table, Natalie watched the shift happen, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This was the moment where everything he had built his confidence on, position, authority, perception, began to slip. Not because she took it, because it wasn't as solid as he believed. Victoria placed another document in front of the board. "This outlines the interim structure," she said. "Executive decisions will require board approval during the review period." One of the directors frowned. "That's going to slow operations," he said. "It will protect them." Victoria replied, again not emotional, procedural. Lauren crossed her arms. "This is overreach," she said. "You're treating him like he's already guilty," Natalie finally responded. "No," she said. "We're treating the situation like it matters." Lauren opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Because there was no easy way to push back against that without sounding defensive. Ryan looked at Natalie again. This time there was something different in his expression. Not anger, not disbelief. Something closer to realization. "You planned this," he said quietly. Natalie shook her head. "I prepared for it," she replied. That distinction landed hard. Because planning implied intent to hurt. Preparation implied expectation of being hurt. Ryan didn't know what to say to that. For a moment the room fell into a strange kind of quiet, not tense, not chaotic, just recalibrating. Then the corporate secretary spoke again. "There is one additional matter," she said. Everyone turned. She adjusted the papers in front of her. "Per governance requirements," she continued, "any ongoing personal relationships between executives that may present a conflict of interest must be disclosed." Lauren's breath caught, just slightly, but enough. Ryan didn't react immediately, but his grip on the folder tightened again. The secretary didn't look at either of them directly. She didn't need to. "This includes relationships that may have influenced decision-making, access to confidential information, or financial reporting, she added. The words hung in the air. Clear. Unavoidable. Lauren stepped back. This is going too far, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. Ryan looked at her. Really looked this time. Not as a partner, not as an ally, but as someone now tied to everything being questioned, everything being reviewed, or everything that could collapse, and for the first time, doubt crept in. Not about Natalie, about everything else. Victoria closed the file in front of her. The review will proceed, she said. Effective immediately. Natalie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had already changed the direction of the room. Ryan leaned back slowly in his chair, his mind racing in a way it hadn't before. Because now it wasn't just about losing control. It was about understanding how much he had misunderstood, or how much he had dismissed, how much he had never even thought to question. Across from him, Natalie finally stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just finished. This isn't about destroying the company, she said quietly. It's about making sure it survives. Charles closed his eyes briefly. Because he understood now. She hadn't come to take, she had come to stabilize, and he had been too proud to see it. Ryan watched her as she gathered her things. There was no anger in her movements, or no urgency, just quiet finality. As if she had already moved on from needing anything from this room. That was the part he couldn't accept. You're just walking away, he asked. Natalie paused, not turning back immediately. Then she did. I already did, she said. And this time everyone understood what she meant. She had walked away the moment she chose dignity over defense. The moment she refused to argue her worth. The moment she stopped trying to be seen by people who never really looked. She stepped toward the door. Victoria moved with her. The board remained seated. No one stopped her. No one could. Because she wasn't leaving, she was stepping into control. Ryan stared at the table long after she was gone, at the documents, at the signatures, at the evidence, at the silence. And then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, a new email notification. Subject line, formal notice of independent audit, executive accounts. He opened it, and his stomach dropped, because attached to it was a full report he had never seen before. Charles Whitmore didn't wait long. He requested the meeting before the boardroom had even settled back into its usual rhythm, before the audit notices had fully circulated through internal channels, before Ryan could attempt to regain control of anything that was already slipping beyond him. Natalie agreed. Not because she owed him anything, but because there were still people inside the company who had nothing to do with what Ryan had done, and they would be the ones who paid the price if everything collapsed. They met in a smaller conference room, one Charles had used for years before things had grown too large, too public, too complicated to contain behind closed doors. This room felt different, quieter, honest. Charles stood when she entered, not out of formality, or out of respect. That alone said more than anything he could have said out loud. Natalie, he began, his voice steady but tired. Thank you for coming. She nodded once and took a seat across from him. Victoria Lawson remained near the door, not intruding, but present enough to remind everyone that this wasn't just a personal conversation anymore. It carried weight, it carried consequence. Charles didn't waste time. I was wrong, he said. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it. I misjudged you. I misjudged everything. Natalie didn't respond immediately. She let the words sit, because apologies when they came too quickly often meant nothing. But this one felt different, not desperate, not defensive, just late. You didn't ask, she said quietly. Charles frowned slightly. What do you mean? You didn't ask who I was, she said. You decided. The room held that sentence longer than expected, because it wasn't an accusation. It was a fact, Charles exhaled slowly. That's true, he admitted. He leaned back slightly, the weight of years of decisions pressing into that single moment. I built this company believing I could read people, he said. I thought I understood loyalty, strength, value. He paused. I thought I understood my own family. Natalie didn't interrupt, because she knew what came next wasn't about her. It was about everything he had refused to see. I protected Ryan, Charles continued. Even when I shouldn't have, I convinced myself he just needed time, or that he would grow into the role. He looked down briefly. I didn't see what he was becoming. Natalie's gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either, because this wasn't her responsibility to fix. Charles looked back up at her. But you did, he said. It wasn't nodded once. I saw the patterns, she said. The decisions, the risk. And you said nothing, Charles replied. There was no accusation in it, just curiosity. Natalie held his gaze. I said enough, she answered, just not in a way anyone wanted to hear. Charles let out a quiet breath. He couldn't argue with that because he remembered the suggestions, the quiet warnings, the moments he had dismissed as overcaution, or as inexperience, as someone who didn't understand the scale of what they were dealing with. He had been wrong, and now the company was paying for it. We're going to lose control if this continues, he said. Natalie didn't react. Control of what? She asked. The company, Charles said. Natalie shook her head slightly. The company is already under control, she said. That stopped him, because he understood what she meant, just not in the way he expected. Then what are we losing? He asked. Natalie leaned back slightly. Trust, she said. Not power, not ownership build. Charles nodded to rebuild. He understood that too. After a moment he spoke again. What do you want? He asked. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an acknowledgement. Because, for the first time, he knew she wasn't asking for anything she hadn't already earned. Natalie didn't answer right away. She looked toward the window, where the older section of Whitmore Industrial Group's facility stood in the distance. A building that had outlasted leadership changes, financial cycles, and generations of decisions. I want the company to survive, she said. Simple, clear, no hidden meaning. Charles studied her expression. You could have taken it, he said, stripped it down, or sold the assets, walked away with profit. Natalie turned back to him. That would have been easy, she said. And this isn't, he asked. She shook her head no, she said. This is responsibility, the word settled differently, because it wasn't about power. It was about what came with it. Charles sat with that. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he asked the question he had been avoiding. Why didn't you tell him, he said. Natalie knew exactly who he meant. Ryan, her expression didn't change. Because I needed to know who he was without it, she said. Charles frowned slightly. And now you do, he said. Natalie held his gaze. Yes, she answered. That answer carried more weight than anything else in the room. Because it meant there was no going back, no misunderstanding left to resolve, no illusion left to protect. Charles nodded slowly. I'll step down, he said. The words came quietly. But they were final. Natalie didn't react with surprise. She had expected it. Not because she demanded it, but because he understood what needed to happen. That's your decision, she said. It's the right one, Charles replied. He straightened slightly. But I'd like to stay involved during the transition, he added. If you allow it. Natalie considered that, not emotionally, logically. He still knew the company better than anyone, and for the first time he wasn't trying to protect the wrong things. You can advise, she said. Not control. Charles nodded. That's fair. Victoria stepped forward slightly, noting the shift in agreement. Then we can formalize the transition structure, she said. Charles gave a small nod, but before she could continue, the door opened. Ryan didn't knock. He walked in. His expression was different now. Not confident, not dismissive, sharp, focused. He looked between them, then at Victoria. So this is where decisions are being made, he said. Natalie didn't move. Charles didn't speak. Ryan stepped further into the room. I've reviewed the audit, he said. There was tension in his voice now, not anger, something closer to pressure, and Charles asked. Ryan exhaled once. It's incomplete, he said. Victoria's expression didn't change. It's ongoing, she replied. Ryan shook his head. No, he said. It's selective. That word shifted the air again, because now he wasn't just defending himself. He was challenging the process. Natalie finally spoke. What are you suggesting? She asked. Ryan looked at her. I'm suggesting there are transactions missing context, he said. Decisions made under pressure, deals that required discretion. Lauren's influence echoed in that argument. Even if she wasn't in the room, Victoria stepped in. Then you'll have the opportunity to present that context during the review, she said. Ryan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Natalie. You're controlling this, he said. Natalie didn't deny it. I'm responsible for it, she replied. Ryan took another step closer. Then you should also be accountable, he said. That landed. Because for the first time, he wasn't just reacting. He was pushing back, and pushing back meant he wasn't finished yet. Victoria's tone sharpened slightly. Accountability applies to everyone involved, she said. Ryan's gaze didn't leave Natalie. Good, he said quietly. Then he reached into his folder and placed a document on the table. I'll start with this, he said. Natalie didn't move immediately, but Victoria did. She stepped forward and picked it up. Her eyes scanned the first page, and for the first time since she had entered the building that day, her expression changed, only slightly. But enough, Natalie noticed. So did Charles. "What is it?" Charles asked. Victoria didn't answer right away. She turned one more page, then looked up. "This," she said carefully, "appears to be a counter-report." Ryan didn't speak. He let the silence stretch, because he knew exactly what he had just done. Natalie finally reached for the document, and as her eyes moved across the page, she realized something wasn't right, because parts of it shouldn't exist at all. The document Ryan placed on the table didn't destroy Natalie. It exposed him. By the time the counter-report was fully reviewed, verified and cross-checked by independent counsel, the conclusion was no longer a matter of opinion. Sections had been altered. Supporting data had been selectively removed. Context had not been missing, it had been rewritten. Not by accident, not under pressure, but deliberately. Ryan didn't argue after that. He couldn't, because for the first time, the system he trusted to protect him was the same system holding him accountable. The audit expanded. External investigators were brought in. Legal boundaries replaced personal assumptions. Every claim he tried to make unraveled under documentation he could not control anymore. Lauren stepped back before the process reached its final stage. Quietly, no statements, no defense, just distance. And that silence spoke clearly enough. Ryan's position was formally removed during the final board resolution. Not with anger, not with spectacle. Just a vote, recorded and documented, as the company moved forward without him. He didn't fight it, because there was nothing left to fight with. The divorce followed the same path, structured, measured, bound by the prenup he had once believed would protect him. It did, just not in the way he expected. Natalie didn't ask for more than what was legally defined. She didn't push for penalties beyond what the process justified. She didn't use her position to destroy him. She simply allowed the system to work, and that was enough. Ryan left the company quietly, without public statements, without farewell speeches. His name remained in records, but not in influence. For the first time in years, he had no control over how he was seen, only how he started over. Charles Whitmore stepped down not long after. His retirement wasn't forced. It wasn't dramatic. It was accepted. He remained involved in a limited advisory role during the transition, just as Natalie had allowed, but the authority he once held no longer defined the company. He understood that, and more importantly, he accepted it. On his final day in the executive office, he paused before leaving, looking across the same view he had once believed would always belong to him. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like something being set back into balance. Whitmore Industrial Group didn't collapse. It stabilized, slowly at first, carefully. Decisions were reviewed, structures were adjusted, financial discipline replaced assumptions. The urgency that once drove risky choices was replaced with measured control. Employees stayed, operations continued. And over time, the company began to recover not because it was saved in one moment, but because it was finally managed with clarity. Natalie never rushed to take a public role, not immediately. For weeks, her name remained absent from press releases. Decisions were signed through formal channels. Ownership was clear internally, but externally, the company simply moved forward. Until one morning, that changed. A single statement was released. No dramatic announcement, no press conference, just a formal update. Natalie Bennett was publicly identified as Natalie Sterling, the controlling owner of Whitmore Industrial Group. The response was immediate. Not shock, recognition, because the clues had always been there, the quiet authority, the understanding of the company. The way certain decisions had always waited for her approval, even when no one acknowledged it. Now, the name connected to the reality. But Natalie didn't change how she moved through the world. She didn't step into the spotlight. She didn't redefine herself around the word billionaire, because she never needed it to define her. In her new office, one she rarely used unless necessary, she kept the same habits. Reviewing reports late, listening more than speaking, letting decisions build from understanding, not urgency. People treated her differently now. Of course they did. But she noticed something important. The ones who respected her before the reveal hadn't changed. And the ones who hadn't now understood why they should have. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, she crossed paths with Ryan again. Not planned, not just inevitable. He was leaving a smaller office building downtown, carrying a simple briefcase, no longer surrounded by assistance or attention. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ryan looked different, not broken, but stripped of the certainty he once carried. "I read the announcement," he said finally. Natalie nodded. There was no tension in her posture, no need for defense. Ryan let out a quiet breath. "I didn't lose because of the money," he said. "It wasn't a question." Natalie met his eyes. "No," she said. He nodded slowly. "I lost because I never saw you," he admitted. That was the closest he had come to understanding, and it was enough. Natalie didn't offer comfort, but she didn't reject the moment either, because this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about truth. "I gave you chances," she said gently. Ryan looked down for a second. "I know," he replied. There was nothing else to say after that. No apology that could undo what had been done. No explanation that could restore what had been lost. And for the first time, both of them accepted that. Natalie gave a small nod and stepped past him. Not out of anger, not out of indifference, but because she no longer needed anything from that part of her life. As she walked away, the city moved around her like it always had, unchanged, unaffected. But something inside her had shifted, not because she had proven anything, but because she had stopped needing to. The company she had quietly saved continued to grow under steady leadership. Charles visited occasionally, never interfering, always respectful. Ryan rebuilt his life outside the shadow of the Whitmore name, learning in ways he hadn't before. And Natalie remained exactly who she had always been. Just no longer unseen, she didn't carry her title as a shield. She didn't use her wealth as validation, because she understood something most people never did. Respect was never supposed to come after proof. It was supposed to exist before judgment, and when it didn't, no amount of success could replace it. As Natalie stepped into the next phase of her life, she didn't look back at the version of herself that had once been dismissed. She carried forward only what mattered. Clarity, dignity, and the quiet certainty that she had never been less than enough. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your worth to someone who underestimated you. It's finally realizing you never needed their approval at all. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts on when Ryan should have truly seen who Natalie was.